Oh, no.
Yep. Well, welcome everyone to the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy from 27 Degrees Consulting. Today we're really pleased to have Hassan, Souto, and Kayla Machado with us. They're both from the Women's Center in New Bedford. We're going to talk a little bit about domestic violence today. First though, I do want to thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. So I was reading some of the statistics on domestic violence. It's really striking to me how prevalent it is. And what I saw was that 20 people per minute are physically abused in the U.S. By an intimate partner, which is basically translates to the equivalent of 10 million women and men per year. So that's 20 persons per minute. Yep. 10 to 20 million, or sorry, 10 million per year. It's just, they're staggering numbers.
It is. And that's reported too.
So and that's reported. So there's probably others that aren't reported, correct?
Right. We usually, when we talk about statistics in the work we do, because Kayla and I do a lot of trainings for 7th graders on sexual harassment and healthy relationship on 8th graders, we kind of use these statistics, Chris, as a method to really get people to think of it in real terms. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I can give you so many facts and data, but when I say in the United States, 1 out of 4 women and 1 out of 7 men, you start to think to yourself, well, wait a minute. So if there's how many people in this room, one of us will be a victim. Right. But like you already noted, a lot of those numbers are underreported. A lot of people still view intimate personal violence and domestic violence as a stigma and don't really feel comfortable talking about it, especially men.
Right. It's interesting.
It is.
Right. And we had you on before, and I hadn't even really thought about the aspect of men being victims of this.
I was just going to mention that.
And I was surprised that it's actually very prevalent.
A lot of people are.
Also. Right. Yeah. So it's not women alone, it's women, it's men, both.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, since I've been at the Women's Center, I've probably had at least a dozen male victims. Men that have driven an hour to my office to see me because they said maybe they're in the Cape and they called, somewhere local and, hey, I want a male counsel. We don't have one. And he just kept, increasing the radius until he finally found one because maybe he didn't feel comfortable talking to a female. And a lot of the men that I work with, some of them are victims of sexual assault as a child, and some of them are victims of sexual assault in the last couple years.
Right. Wow, it's amazing.
It is.
Hassan, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to follow up on one question. Are those statistics typical of what we're seeing in the Fall River, New Bedford, southeastern Mass area? And how do those statistics for the U.S. vary compared to the rest of the world? Are we higher or on par with what we're seeing worldwide?
So that's a really great question, Chris. So for instance, when we say that 1 in 4 women will be a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking in their lifetime, that's a national statistic. But for Massachusetts, New Bedford, Fall River, it's 1 in 3.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. I try to find out what's going on in our state and city because a lot of times, like when I work with like the mayor's office, which I work with the Fall River, New Bedford mayor's office, they like to know about a lot about what's going on right here with our community.
Right.
Son, what's the break point that people feel like it's reportable? Like there's all types of abuse. Yep. There's like verbal abuse and physical abuse.
Correct.
And you can talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely.
But at what point does, say, verbal abuse, like, can you define that a little bit?
Of course
like, when does it become verbal abuse past like an argument? Like
absolutely. Yep, I can absolutely define that. So when we think about intimate partner violence and domestic violence, it's very important to know that wherever there's physical violence, in 90% of cases of physical violence, there's verbal and emotional violence, okay? Verbal is me trying to control or affect the way that you feel about yourself. About the way that you see yourself, and emotional is about how you feel about yourself. Mm-hmm. Some examples of emotional abuse are gaslighting.
What's that mean, gaslighting?
Gaslighting is, why don't you talk about gaslighting?
I just learned this term the other day. It's not from our generation, but go ahead.
It's more from Kayla's generation.
Right. I would say gaslighting is like, you did something and then I confront you about it and then you completely, that didn't happen. You are ignoring it completely. You make it seem like the other person's at fault.
You're
not you.
crazy.
Yeah, like you brush it under and nothing happened. Kind of like a narcissistic tendency as well, but gaslighting is its own subject, I guess.
Yeah. And love bombing.
Yes, absolutely.
What's
love bombing. You want to explain it?
I'll
We
explain
should
it.
do a generational
Yeah, so-
show on domestic
So love
violence.
bombing is, I don't know, I might have did something wrong, and now Chris, I'm gonna, oh, I love you. You're the best doctor in the world. I would be nothing without you. It's just sort of, and that's not normal.
Like suffocating somebody
suffocating.
with love. That way they have no choice but to stay with you because they feel obligated to, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So it's after someone maybe had some type of violent interaction, then they come back and really in an over aggressive way preach their love and whatnot to try to maintain that person in their circle of control.
And it is a cycle, like you said. So that love bombing would come in the honeymoon phase. So it's the honeymoon phase, everything's great. Then there's some tension building, maybe someone slams something or calls a name, and then there's the incident. And that incident can be physical violence or emotional violence or verbal abuse. And again, when you go back to the honeymoon phase, it usually starts off with a lot of love bombing.
Okay.
Do you usually see a progression, or can someone be just like this nice, sweet person all of a sudden, wham, they change on a dime?
That's a really good question, Nancy. So one thing that we've discovered in our work and in the emerging literature for domestic violence is that most abusers are very charming to other people in their life. So, I might be in a relationship with somebody who's abusive, but that person may be loved by my parents, loved at the community. And, because domestic violence is about power and control, things like anger management aren't going to work for them.
Does anger management work in general?
I don't know.
Like
I don't know. That's a really great question.
They still dictate sometimes in the court system, right? That you have to go to anger management.
Yeah.
I would say it would work, but only if you're looking to change and you want the help. If you don't want the help, it won't help, obviously, as with anything else.
Yeah, I guess along the same lines, and I think this is what Nancy is almost asking, can abusers be reformed? Can they change?
Right.
Or is that hard to do?
I think it's a little hard to do, but so at the Women's Center and a lot of DV programs, they don't work with batterers, but there are batterer programs. There's actually one here in Fall River.
Yeah.
And they have a curriculum for abusers to try to get to the root cause of why they abuse. Some abusers abuse because they were abused.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of reasons why, and there are programs for them. So if there's somebody watching the show who's abusive, there are programs probably in your city or town that can help you sort of work through some of that.
I think, Chris, too, addiction plays into that too, right? Because sometimes your other self comes out if you're using some kind of addictive substance, and that doesn't help.
I don't know the statistics, but I have to assume that there's a high incidence of substance abuse, alcoholism, and whatnot with abusers.
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. So when you think of things like alcoholism, poverty, the coronavirus, one of the unintended consequences was isolation. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the power and control wheel, which is just a diagram that telegraphs how an abuser maintains power and control, one of the little spokes on the wheel is isolation. Mm-hmm. So you think of the coronavirus and people are more isolated. Perfect. One of the other spokes is financial abuse. And I've had two clients in last year who came to me just for financial abuse because it was wreaking havoc in her life. All those things are an unintended consequence of coronavirus.
Can you give an example of financial abuse?
I can give an example of financial abuse. So let's say you and I are married and I'm the breadwinner and you're not. And let's say we have a couple children who have medical needs and I don't want to put them on my medical insurance. Or let's say I do want to put them on my medical insurance, but this is a kind of a true story, by the way. And maybe I don't want to drive them to Boston for their medical needs. Let's say I don't want to make sure that you have, everything that you need to go to work, to have the clothes and the shoes that you need. And again, I'm using this as a real example of someone that I worked with like that, whereas I might have two trucks in my driveway and you have a car that's falling apart. Or when it's time for groceries and stuff like that, maybe I will decide to withhold or expend money or credit based on how I feel about you that day as a method to maintain power and control. That's one of many examples.
Hassan, how do you thought through these kind of conversations? Because I imagine there's two sides to every story.
There are.
So then you hear like the other side. If you're,
Yep.
I imagine,
Yep.
you know, it has to be hard to direct someone,
Mhm.
you know, if someone else is giving you 180-degree information.
Yep.
Like, how do you handle that?
I think we have a method for that. So at the Women's Center, we decide that when a victim or survivor comes to us, we believe them.
Right.
Okay.
That is our policy and that is our procedure, because when they go through the criminal justice system, law enforcement, family, friends, they're going to be judged, they're going to be assessed. So
Mhm.
we choose to believe them.
That's great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you talk
That's the way
a
it should
little
be.
bit about
Thank you.
the yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about the Women's Center and what happens when someone comes into your door? And can people just walk through there?
Yeah, so right now we're trying to be careful with walk-ins just to keep people safe. However,
Yeah.
if somebody were to just stop at the Women's Center out the blue, they would be greeted by, we have all of our brochures outside and a live person speaking to them.
Perfect.
So they don't just knock on the door and stand outside. We have literally somebody from 8:30 to 4:30 on camera in our office at the front door.
Nice.
And we're telling them, hey, we're not doing walk-ins right now because we're trying to keep you and the community safe. There's a brochure right here. Here's a phone number. Go in your car, go home, call us, and we will set up something through telehealth to book you in the next 24 hours.
Oh, that's perfect.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you have a very tight
Oh, we're
timeline as
very,
well.
I mean, it might even be less than that.
Mhm.
And the intake process is only about 10 to 15 minutes.
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
So then walk me through that. If I'm in
Okay.
an abusive relationship
Yep.
and I've kind of had it and I know about you and
Yep.
you're located where in New Bedford?
405 County Street.
405 County Street. And I call you, like, what are those next steps like?
So the next steps are like, you would be to call me. You might get me. You might get Kayla. We're going to ask you if you're in a safe place to talk. And then we're going to say, we have some questions for you. You can only answer what you feel comfortable. And we're going to get some data on you, your name, your date of birth, your phone number, some information on the abuser, and a little brief description of what happened. And then we'll ask you, are you looking for counseling? Are you looking for groups? Are you looking for legal advocacy? Are you looking for residential? Because we have a slew of programs. Are you looking to work with our brilliant child and adolescent trauma program, who are all master's level clinicians who work with children? And once we sort of help you determine with us what you need, you'll get a phone call in a day or two to set something up.
Okay.
So what happens if there's a nuclear family, mom, dad, and two kids?
Mhm.
Maybe the dad's an alcoholic. The mom just wants to kind of keep everything status quo. But as an aunt, maybe you know that one of the kids is like suffering. Can you take that 14-year-old
Oh, absolutely.
and bring them up there? Or you don't need parental consent or anything?
We do
like
need
that?
parental consent. We do need parental consent to have the child be serviced by our trauma program.
Okay.
And parental consent can be from anybody who's a guardian. But yes,
Okay.
that's the stipulation because we don't want to get sued.
Of
You know what I
course,
mean?
of
Makes
course.
But yeah.
So then, what are the programs that you have set up for someone who's a victim of very bad physical abuse? And I know in healthcare we have mandated reporters and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
So what's your role in that situation?
We have a few roles in that. So whenever somebody shows up to St. Anne's, St. Luke's, Toby Hospital, I'm probably missing one, we are dispatched to go there. If they're
Okay.
sexually assaulted or domestic violence, anybody who shows up to any of these hospitals in our catchment area, which is Swansea to Wareham,
Mhm.
one of us would show up. One
So-
of us as one of the social.
Would that be, so not to interrupt,
No,
but
you're
would
fine.
the doctor at the hospital make that referral? Would the social worker make the referral? How would that work?
The social worker.
So there's a social worker from the hospital does the intake and gets a sense that there's an issue
Yeah,
and then contacts you.
they do. And
Okay.
sometimes it's 3:00 in the morning, 6:00 in the morning, and one of us go out and we let them know that, again, we're not there to judge. We're not there to assess. We're there to provide a service and see if they're interested in making a referral
Right.
for maybe they want to learn about our 209A, because we have a legal advocacy program that will help you navigate the court system, because that alone can be very intimidating for somebody.
Mhm.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So they're never on their own with this journey.
That's
to
true.
get
They're
to
not.
a
And
better place.
I mean, it sounds kind of too good to be true, but it really is. I mean, if you went to the 3rd District Court right now, we have 1 or 2 people from the Women's Center there right now.
That's great.
Yep.
So then, Chris, like with the physicians in offices, if
Right.
You're suspecting some kind of abuse in the home, what what are you usually doing? Like you're hooking up like that? I would imagine they can do referrals straight from physician offices as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the key thing from a physician perspective is that you have to suspect it and you have to ask the question. And I think one of the failings right now of medicine as it is that we are all so busy that there's a lot of questions that don't get asked. And it's unfortunate. But you're dealing with a lot of health concerns, diabetes, maybe heart disease, hypertension, and whatnot. And these are the things that we have to ask, but unfortunately, I think sometimes in medicine get left out.
Of course.
So I would, of course, urge any physicians or any healthcare providers out there who are listening to this to keep in mind the importance of this issue and to ask the question, because without asking the question, you'll never get the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And then once, if we do ask that question and we get the answer that there is an issue that's occurring, then I would reach out to an organization like yours.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
But I do believe it's very underreported in this country.
Absolutely.
Very underreported.
It is. And a lot of times if you have an abuser who goes maybe to a pediatric appointment, maybe the abuser's with them.
Yeah.
When we do our psychoeducational groups, the person doesn't have to participate in the group, but they have to have the camera on because sometimes the abuser's in the room or around them controlling what they say. So every time Kayla and I speak with one of our clients, we always ask, are you in a safe space to speak? Especially if we call them, because we might have an appointment every Thursday at 11, but that Thursday at 11 we might call them and we don't know who's around. So we try to make sure they're in a safe space to speak. We've had people who call us from closets. If you can think of it, it's probably something that we've experienced.
How do you keep people safe? Someone calls you and they say that, I feel that I am in danger of physical harm.
Yep.
My partner has been abusing me, beating me. They're now in a closet somewhere making the call, or maybe their partner stepped out of the home and they have that 1 minute to call you.
Yep.
What do you do? How do you deal with that situation?
Well, first of all, Chris, we try to use as much time as we have, but the second you said that, my goal is a safety plan. A safety plan to come up with I would love 5 minutes to do that, but we try to come up with a safety plan with them, whether it's a brother or a sister or parents' house that they can go to, or friends, where they could take their children if they were in an emergency. And when we work with people long-term with counseling, we work on a safety plan with them regardless of what their goals are. And a safety plan, if you're wondering, it involves, if you were to have an incident where you needed to leave, where would you go? Where would your license be? Where would your passport be? Where would your social security card be? Would you have a bag with a few dollars in it and photocopies of what you need, but something that they could grab and go if they needed to?
And that might not,
some of that,
right, but some of that may not be accessible because the controller, the person who's abusing may be controlling those documents, the finances. That becomes very difficult. Are you able to help people out who don't have resources to even $1 or $2 or any ability to get out of the home because of everything is controlled?
Yeah. So, I can give you an example. I have a client that I'm working with now, and she's homeless. So we got her an apartment. We paid her first, last, and security. We're paying her rent until June, and we furnished her apartment. And because of that, she got all 4 of her kids back from DCF. This is actually, I'm very, very, very proud of this. But this is stuff we do every day.
Right.
So this person went from somebody homeless with her children scattered throughout the system, on the run from her abuser, and now she's been able to be reunified with an apartment that's fully furnished.
Where are you getting all the furniture and the funds to do all that?
We're federally funded for domestic violence and sexual assault resources. And I have to give a shout out to our executive director, Pamela Machado, because she works tirelessly to acquire these funds. I don't do none of that. She does it, and she does a great job. I can't even imagine the cost of paying somebody's rent, from now until June and furnishing it. So I was just so humbled that I was able to do this for my client, but I didn't really do anything. My agency did.
It's great to have that available.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
So talk me through, if I'm in a situation, and I'm just thinking, if I'm in a situation like Chris described, where someone's very controlling and manipulative and has everything, I'm thinking in my head, there's no way I'm gonna, like me personally, I'm gonna go to my brother's house because I don't want to bring all that into his house because I know my husband's gonna follow me there and cause a big scene, and I just don't want to deal with that. I want to go somewhere that's secret and safe. And
we got you. Yeah, we have emergency safe homes.
So
Yeah.
talk about that a little
I
bit.
will. So we have
And
3.
can kids go with me?
Yeah,
I can grab them?
Absolutely.
And it's not going to be, she stole the kids or anything
No,
like that?
absolutely not. So we have 3 emergency safe homes. We actually have 1 here in Fall River, and we have 2 in New Bedford. They are for families, and one of them is for dually diagnosed. Because one of you mentioned earlier about substance abuse playing a huge role in this.
Yeah.
So we have set up, my agency has set up a safe home for domestic violence and substance abuse.
Okay.
And you're right, maybe you might have nowhere to go. So that's what we have the emergency safe homes for.
I mean, this must get so complicated. I'm just thinking about a typical scenario where it's not just a man and a woman or that are the issue. There's kids involved.
There are.
And now the children could be used almost as chips, as pawns, as a weapon
They are.
against the person who's being abused. It's part of the tactic, right? If you leave me, I'm going to take the kids or whatever it may be. These are just such complicated issues.
We see that way too much, and it's kind of gross, right?
Right.
To use a child as a tool, as a tactic, like Kayla said.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens if 911's called? Like, what happens on the back end of that call? So my husband maybe hit my child and is just out of control.
Yeah.
Or since men experience abuse
They
too,
do.
it can be certainly the opposite, right?
Sure.
So I call 911.
Yeah.
The police come. What happens next, and how do you get involved with that?
So I will say, and I can only really speak for New Bedford right now, but Kayla and I are members of the New Bedford Police Department Human Trafficking Task Force.
Nice.
And if you're like, what does that have to do anything? What does that have to do with anything? It's got us really close with police officers.
Right.
So close that I will get text messages on the weekend, on the night. Like, hey, we're going into a situation. Remind me what the phone number is. Hey, I forgot. Whereas maybe before they would just give the victim a business card if we're lucky, or a brochure. A lot of them will reach directly out to not just me and Kayla, but other social workers. That's one piece. The other piece is we have CPAs who work in the police stations to provide training. They're called civilian police advocates. I always forget that.
Okay.
They work directly in all of our catchment area and beyond. They work with the police departments and the police officers to provide them training, and they work with the victims who the police would be in touch with. So that's a huge piece. And I say I can only speak for the Women's Center because I want to say we have that in Taunton, New Bedford, and a few other cities, but there are a lot of cities who don't. And to be honest with you, Nancy, I think they might be not doing the best job, if I can be frank, about attending domestic violence situations. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'm going to hold you on that thought because I think we're going to break right now for our commercial break. So we're breaking for our commercial.
Primacare is Southeastern New England's trusted leader in medical care. With offices in Fall River and surrounding communities, we're dedicated to your well-being. Our carefully selected team of more than 150 providers offers world-class primary and specialty medical care. Primacare doctors are supported by a skilled staff trained to deliver comprehensive radiology, imaging, and testing services. Primacare is large enough to take care of all your medical needs, but small enough to care for you personally. Primacare is by your side.
Okay.
All right, so we're back. Nancy, you sound like you're ready to ask a
I'm
question.
ready to jump back in, right with Hassan and Kayla. So can you talk to us about a couple of things we haven't approached yet? I know you have some messages you want to get out to our listeners.
So one of them is, I don't know if we've talked enough about the legal advocacy program.
Okay.
And I want to talk about that. So there are some agencies that you can't obtain any help from their agency, some in Northern Mass, unless you have a restraining order.
Okay.
You have to have proof of that. Whereas at the Women's Center, and I'm not trying to say we're better than them. I just want to do a little bit of outreach here. At the Women's Center, we don't believe that a restraining order is a cookie cutter thing. Because as a matter of fact, it might put a victim in more danger.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah.
I have heard things about that
It's true,
before. So
And
yeah,
it could
please, tell us more.
irritate the abuser more. Some people don't even care. It's just a piece of paper to them. They have no fear of the law. They don't care about the consequences. So it could put them in 10 times more danger than they already were.
So when someone is, I think that's what comes down to, and I've heard this and read about this. When someone is thinking of leaving the abuser, that's a really critical time. And that might be a time where they really need help from an organization like yours, because there may be some increased risk around that time if they kind of go about it on their own or go about it in the wrong way. Is that accurate to
How
say?
many times does it take a victim?
6 to 9, 7 to 8. It takes a long time. Could take for a victim to try to leave their abuser. You know, people ask that question a lot. Why don't they leave? They're in a domestic violence relationship. Why are they still with them? There's a lot of different reasons, and we've talked about a lot of them already.
A lot of it is the
financial
control,
the kid, the control, the fear, the lack of support because they've been isolated.
Yep. He's a good person.
Yep.
And, you know, they've seen that person be, be a good person during the honeymoon phase.
Right. But when the victim decides to leave, that is a really critical time.
Yes, as a matter of fact, sorry, I have a little tick in my throat. When a victim leaves, they're at the greatest chance of being murdered. And that's just a national statistical fact. A police person will tell you that, because now that the abuser has completely lost their power and control, you know, like Kayla said, it takes 7 to 9 times for a victim to leave their abuser. So I'm like, oh, Nancy, whatever, you're not going to leave. You know, whatever. Years go by. That 7 to 9 times can take a year. It can take 20. So now when you finally leave, I have no power and control, and I'm desperate. And I can tell you right now that since the coronavirus, murder-suicides have doubled. Some people say tripled, but they doubled. And I'm pretty sure that's part of people deciding that they're going to leave, you know, because you have poverty, sickness, you know, kids working from home. And I think it just compounded stress so much.
Yeah, there's so much more stress now.
There's so much more stress
So much
now.
more.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable. So I can see that being the case. Yeah.
Right.
So now getting back to the legal advocacy.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. So again, a 209A is not a cookie cutter thing for most people.
Wait, a 209.
A 209A is a restraining
order.
And
Okay.
a 250AD is a harassment order. So yeah. So those are protective orders. So it's important for people to be educated on what those entail. So for instance, if you have an abuser who has weapons in the home, that's terrifying. But maybe you didn't know that when you obtain a 209A, they have to relinquish their license to carry. You know, maybe you didn't know that when one acquires a 209A, that custody automatically falls to the person with the 209A. There's things like that people don't know. So our legal advocacy program, it's as simple as you can give us a call and say, I'm thinking about getting a restraining order. And we have a woman who's been working in a legal advocacy department for probably 30 years. And there's nothing she doesn't know. She's locked in with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And she can kind of help that person right over the phone after they do an intake, work out the pros and cons. Maybe somebody shows up to a courthouse and they have this form and they're shaken and they don't know how to fill it out. Our advocates will help them fill it out, give them some information, and metaphorically hold their hand through the process, because it can be very scary. You finally go to court. What if you get to the courthouse and there's a huge line? It's cold up, forget it. What if you get to the courthouse and it's just, you see your abuser there? Maybe they're there for another criminal court case and stuff like that. So that's what our Safe Plan MOVA legal advocates are for, to help you determine if a 209A is appropriate, what it entails, and all the specifics about it.
And I think it's really great too, because personally, I wouldn't want to walk into a courthouse and fill out a 209A by myself for the first time.
Oh my God.
It's very intimidating.
Of
So
course.
to have somebody there to hold your hand practically, walking you through it.
I mean, just if you get called for jury duty, you
Right.
have Agnesh walking
Yeah,
into
That's
the court.
true.
100%. Yeah.
So I can
Definitely.
imagine if you're in one of these situations,
Right.
it's so nice to know there's someone there. And I think throughout this whole podcast that we're doing, Kayla and Hassan, it's so important to know that the Women's Center is more than just a hotline. You know,
It's
that
true.
you have all the support in
Mhm.
place for any situation someone finds himself in. You know, it seems like you just have a wealth and a foundation there that someone can really feel supported by. So
Yeah.
now, we've talked about a plethora of
We
stuff,
have.
but I want to just highlight the journey that someone's going on with kids. So if I'm in an
Yeah.
abusive relationship and I have kids and 3rd grade and 5th grade or whatever, I'm taking the kids, I'm going to a safe place.
Mhm.
Are the kids getting uprooted from their schools and all this stuff? Like,
So we try to do a really good job of making sure they're not. I know that there are some systems in place that will still pick up a child out of their catchment area to make sure that their school's not interrupted. And like if they're in an emergency safe home with us, That's where our CATP program, Child and Adolescent Trauma Program, will come in.
Okay.
And unlike a lot of our counseling that's done over Zoom and over the phone, the children is in person. Because how can you get, a 6, 7, 8-year-old to actually focus through Zoom? So all of that is done in person, face to face. And we have amazing clinicians who are specialized in trauma, children trauma, who work with children, who speak English, Portuguese, Spanish, Haitian. And it's very, very hands-on, and they do really, really incredible work, because what you would provide for a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old is a lot different than what you provide for a 15 or a 16-year-old. And they do a great job of connecting.
How does a child present when they're in a household where domestic violence is taking place? What kind of behaviors do they exhibit?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, Kayla and I work in the middle schools and high schools, and we see it a lot. A lot of times, Chris, children who are victims of DV get misdiagnosed with ADHD.
Okay.
This is a very, very common thing. Picture you're a child, and your brain is going to be focused on survival. So you go home, you have domestic violence, and you're learning that the only ways to communicate is what? Being passive or being aggressive. Now you go to school, you're a bully, you have ADHD, you're in the back falling asleep because you were up all night, maybe worried about your mom, maybe worried about your dad, maybe worried about your dog.
Right.
So you go to school the next day and you're not going to be an A1 student. And what we've been trying to do, is only 2 of us, is try to educate the New Bedford Public School System on that. And they've been great about having us. We have a partnership with them. They've welcomed us with open arms to try to just understand that some of those kids who are problematic, they're problematic because of what they're experiencing at home. So I'm so glad you guys asked that. So I probably would have forgot to talk about that, but that's so important for people watching to.
And I think it's funny not to cut you off. It's just on top of my head. Talking about the 209A and the dog, mentioned worried about your dog. A lot of people don't know in Massachusetts, you can actually take a restraining order out for your pet.
That's huge.
Really?
That's huge. She's right.
Oh.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
So a lot of power and abuse can lead with animal as well, threatening puppies, threatening the family animal, the pet, it's part of your family.
Yeah.
It's another defenseless animal against you. And a lot of people have lost pets to
I'm
that.
so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, that's huge.
That's fascinating. I never knew that.
So now with kids, so when you're transitioning with kids, I think it's important to highlight too that even if the kids aren't physically getting abused or part of the direct abuse, just for them to have that exposure.
Yeah, the witnessing of it.
I mean, when you're thinking, oh my God, do I want to disrupt everything? Do I want to make this leap? I don't know if people are recognizing that there's a definite risk for that exposure. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can.
Compared to when they transition into a safer place and what you've seen, how you've seen the kids react?
Yeah, I can. So I think it's important to know, because I think in the beginning, like when I say the beginning, when people first started, treating children with domestic violence, they thought maybe the kid had to actually physically see the violence. But emerging literature, and I try to keep abreast of that because we're in the schools talking and we get a lot of questions. So I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Emerging literature has shown that a child physically seeing abuse versus being in the room and hearing it are both just as damaging. And I know it sounds a little insane, but that's what the emerging literature says, that whether I see my mom being physically abused or I'm in the other room and I hear it, both those circumstances have the same emotional damage on a child. Okay, so that's why we're in the schools. I think in our schools, 1 out of 15 kids are witnessing domestic violence at home. So when somebody witnesses domestic violence, so they're exposed to it, they're called the secondary victim. And we provide services for secondary victims the same way we provide them for primary victims. Let's say I'm a dad and I've never been in a domestic violence relationship, but my grandkid or my daughter is. I'm a secondary victim, and I can come to the Women's Center and get the whole slew of services as a secondary victim.
What happens to that 12-year-old that you see in the schools that will say something and have a cry out for help, and both parents are denying everything?
Is it a boy or a girl?
Why does it matter?
All right, well, let's say it's a boy and he doesn't get any services. He is 5 times more likely to become an abuser. That's why I was asking. If it's a girl, she's not only more likely to become abused, but she's 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
And
I was wondering, one question I want to throw out there for our viewers is, if they're wondering, how do they recognize if something is going on so they can, try to support someone who may be in that situation? What kind of things would they be looking for?
Yeah, with an adult or with a child, or both?
Let's do both.
Let's do both. So with an adult, if it's somebody that you're friends with, you just, it's really tough when you don't really work in our field, but basically you want to just look for changes in pattern. You know what I mean? Nancy, if you have a best friend and every Wednesday you guys go over to eat and that stopped, and now you notice your friend's isolating, it might not be abuse. Maybe she has cancer. Maybe she's avoiding you, but it's stuff like that you want to look for. But I think more important than what to look for, because let's be honest, we're all not therapists, is what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Good point.
Yeah. So I think what to do is, I'm going to try to go through a list. The number one thing is to always believe them. And we are big proponents of believing them, because when they go to court, when they go through the battle, they're going to have enough people not believing them. The other thing is to always make sure that they're in a safe space to talk. So let's say your best friend calls you and tells you that they're in an abusive relationship. Okay. The next time they call you, they might not want to talk about that. Or the next time you call them, they might not want to talk about that. So as much as you want to, I wouldn't bring it up. But if you absolutely can't help yourself, make sure that they're in a safe space to talk. The third one, and this is hard. Do you want to say something?
I was going to say, it's important to keep in mind that your initial reaction to being told that bad, I call you and we're good friends and I tell you that I'm in an abusive relationship and I give you the details of what's happening. Your initial reaction is going to be, oh, wow, what a piece of,
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to tell me, you're going to backtalk him, or her, or whoever it might be.
Right.
If you do that, you're going to close them off to talking to you again. So if you have a friend that you're talking to and all they want to do is talk bad about that person, you're going to feel like you can't go to them about that anymore, because you're still with that person. You still see them in a different light. So if you go to talk to somebody and you're trying to just relieve yourself and get that out of the emotions out and work it out with somebody, and they're just going to keep bashing that person over and over again, you're not going to want to talk to them about that again.
That's so true.
When does a friend make a recommendation to get professional help, though? Because at some point, you would probably want to do that, refer to the Women's Center or whatnot.
I definitely think that depends on each person. You don't want to push them, but it's definitely better to give them the actual resource. Okay. Don't just tell them, there's places out there you can go get help.
She's right.
Give them the Women's Center.
That's so important.
Doesn't have to be the Women's Center. Hassan always says that you don't have to recommend them to us, but there's other places out there. But give them the actual resource. Don't just tell them, oh, there's places out there. They'll never look.
And what Kayla's saying is, I just want to say this really quick. What she's saying is based on statistics and emerging research. They do so many studies on prevention, and I'm a nerd, so I read it all. And it did show that somebody's more likely to get help if you say, here's the number to Jane Doe 508-996-3343 versus, oh, there's help out there. She's right. Yeah.
Yeah, be specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be the Women's Center, because I don't want to seem like I'm trying to just promote us. It can be any agency, but that's more effective saying you can go to Dr. Chris if you have an issue versus, oh, there's doctors out there.
Right.
Right. And what's the number that they're calling for the
508-996-3343.
And we'll post that also.
Yes.
We'll post that. So I'd want to have a bird's eye view of everything, and just kind of summarize some of the main points so that our audience understands. So what I'm hearing is that, first of all, this is a huge problem.
It is.
And we discussed some of the statistics previously about how big the scope of the issue is in the U.S. and even more so in our area. But there's different types of abuse, it sounds like. There's physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse, financial, and it's really all about control, it sounds like.
It's all about power and control.
Right? It's about power and control. And then if someone is in this situation, I think what's important for them to know is that there are resources out there, yours being one resource, and there are ways to get help to extricate themselves from that situation.
There is, and that help is confidential and free. Yep.
Right.
All of our services are free and confidential.
Free, no healthcare necessary, no insurance.
Can you share with our audience just one particularly poignant story, without obviously giving away any names or identifying information, that really touched you and has stuck with you over the years?
Oh boy, yeah, I can probably give you a million. I had a client when I first started who, when I work with, because remember, we do so much education outreach that I think people forget that we're also counselors. We are, our outreach takes a big hold of it, but we are still counselors. I had a client who usually when I first work with the client, I tell them, at our next session, I want you to think of a few goals, just what you'd like to get out of counseling. It can be, you want to come up with a safety plan. You want to learn more about domestic violence or parenting or healthy relationships. But I had one who wanted to come up with an escape plan to Maine. Mm-hmm. So she was working at I won't say where, like Chris said, but she was working at a fast food restaurant not far from my job. So she would tell her abuser she was working till 6 when she was really working till 4, and she would walk over and see me. And I felt very proud, Chris, and she was, that she made it to Maine with her mom. They made it into a big house. And she did everything with the safety plan. She left her phone behind, and she has a 4-year-old child. And last time I checked, she's safe and she's away. So that's one of my proudest stories.
Yeah. That's great. That's a good story. Kayla, do you have a story that you would like to share? Anything?
I've only recently started with counseling, but I do have a client with me now that she was with the man for quite a long time, and she has children as well. And she took it upon herself to leave, and she's in a safe place, and she's with her children, and she's now battling, the legal front of it, but she's doing really well. And I'm really proud of that. She just took up and did it herself.
So you see a lot of success stories. You see a lot of people you're able to help,
we try to.
Wonderful.
Yeah, because we do see a lot of abuse and people in hospitals and people getting raped and all that stuff. So we do try to find the silver lining, like Kayla said, when we have a client who actually gets away. Because I told you it takes 7 to 9 times for that person to leave. And when they leave, they're at, a great risk of being murdered, not abused, murdered. So it's always great when somebody like Kayla's client who made it away from the abuse, or my client who I just pictured her in Maine, just, on a ranch or something. That might not be the case, but she made it away from the abuse with her child, and that's all she wanted. And for months, she had to hide where she was going, but that she was working, and it was a lot.
Of
It
course.
was a lot.
It's a lot for one person to go through.
It is.
Do any of your success stories ever ask to come back and be part of your workshops?
All the time.
Because that has to be so inspiring.
All the time, yeah. And that usually happens. So April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And even huger for the public is October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we always have a guest speaker. Those videos are still up right now on our Facebook too, if anybody wants to see them. But we always sit down with the survivor and say, tell your story, because Kayla and I can talk all day, but I think it's a lot more effective when a victim. So we try every year to get somebody who has been, they don't have to go to the Women's Center, but somebody who was a victim, got help, and where they are now, to just do a 10-minute interview on Facebook with us, so that people are like, I don't want to listen to 2 counselors anymore. I'm over it. Somebody who wants to hear an actual victim. We try to do that for the public whenever we can.
That would be great as follow-up in October for our show, to have an inspiring story.
If you need one, let me know. Yeah,
I think that would be an incredible show, actually.
Yeah. And she's open to, I always tell her, talk about what you want, but she's open to talk about everything. And I won't get into it now, but her case was one of the worst. One of the worst I've ever heard. And she's very open now about being an advocate. She helps Kayla and I every October, and her story is just, it should be a book.
I think we'll have to have you back then and do that. I think that would be a tremendous opportunity.
Just in closing, what's the most important message that you would like to get out to our viewers?
I think the most important message would be to, if you know somebody who's suffering from domestic violence, to believe them, to make sure they're in a safe space whenever you talk to them, and to offer them a resource. When you ask that question, there's so many things I can think of, but I think that would be the biggest one, because when we say that, 1 in 4 women will be a victim, if you look around in your family, your classroom, your book club, and you look around, you have, 8 girls or 10 girls, you can do the math yourself. So I think the most effective advice for me to have on closing would be to give people tips on what they can do in real time if they have somebody who discloses domestic violence to them.
If someone wants to read more and learn more, what would you recommend to them?
I would strongly recommend janedoe.com. A lot of what we've taught today, janedoe.com is Massachusetts. They're a cohort of all the DV agencies, and they post all the emerging literature, because we want to be up to date. I'm sure your premise is about making sure that information is correct. Jane Doe is huge about the most current statistics. You can look up statistics for your town, and all the emerging literature, they are so up to date. They probably have something in the last hour. If anybody wants to look, they have book recommendations too.
Because we have listeners and viewers that are outside of the area, the Fall River and Bedford area, will it have information on where they can?
Yep.
They can get resources. That's
Yep.
great to know.
It is.
JaneDoe.com.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Well, this was a really wonderful discussion. I want to thank you both. I want to thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank, which is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. So Hassan and Kayla, thank you. This was really educational, and I think our viewers enjoyed it. And I'm hoping that there are some people who watch it will really benefit.
Me too.
And if there's anyone in a situation where they feel they're at harm's risk or risk for harm, then they know they can reach out to an organization like the Women's Center. And that number, once again,
is 508-996-3343.
All right. Thank you so much. And we'll have you back again at some point.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.